In the vast expanse of the Galactic Defense Coalition, where alien species with millennia of warfare experience commanded fleets that could glass entire star systems, humanity was still considered the new kids on the block. Fresh-faced, inexperienced, and hopelessly outmatched by beings who had perfected the art of war before Earth's sun had even formed. But, sometimes, the galaxy gets it wrong about humans. Sometimes, what they mistake for inexperience is actually something far more dangerous: innovation born from desperation, creativity forged in the fires of a species that crawled up from the bottom of the food chain, and an unpredictability that comes from being the only race foolish enough to charge into certain death with a smile. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was about to become the perfect example of why underestimating humanity was the last mistake many alien commanders would ever make. What started as a routine assignment to the quietest sector in known space would become the stuff of legends whispered across 1,000 worlds. A story of how one inexperienced human turned the tide of an impossible war and earned a name that would echo through the cosmos long after the stars themselves burned out. This is that story. The assignment board in the Coalition Academy's main hall buzzed with nervous energy as hundreds of fresh graduates scanned for their first postings. Lieutenant Sarah Chen stood 5 feet 4 inches tall, dwarfed by the towering Krillian warriors and the floating forms of the energy-based Luxari around her. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her brown eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had worked twice as hard as everyone else just to be here. The human contingent at the academy was small. Only 50 humans had made it through the grueling 4-year program, and Sarah knew exactly why. The other species had centuries, sometimes millennia, of military tradition. The Krillians had been perfecting battlefield tactics since before Earth had developed agriculture. The Zephyrians possessed natural tactical abilities that let them process battlefield information at superhuman speeds. The Taraxians were born with enhanced reflexes and strength that made them natural soldiers. Humans brought nothing special to the table except stubbornness and an alarming tendency to survive situations that should have killed them. At least, that's what the instructors always said in their more candid moments. Sarah's fingers traced over her assignment pad as the results came through. Her heart sank as she read the destination: Frontier Station 7, Outer Rim Sector 12. The absolute edge of civilized space, where nothing ever happened except supply runs and the occasional asteroid survey. It was the kind of posting that career military officers got when they were being quietly shuffled toward retirement. Around her, her classmates were getting assignments to prestigious fleet commands, defensive positions around major worlds, and elite tactical units. Marcus Webb, a Texan who had become her closest friend during their academy years, appeared at her shoulder with his own pad. "Core Defense Fleet," he said with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "I'm going to be protecting Earth herself." "What did you get?" Sarah showed him her pad without saying anything. Marcus's expression fell. "Frontier Station 7? Sarah, that's..." He struggled for words. "That's where they send people to disappear." "What the hell happened?" "Your scores were better than half the people who just got prime assignments." She had been wondering the same thing. Sarah Chen had graduated third in her class, with top marks in tactical analysis, xenobiology, and crisis management. She could field strip a plasma rifle blindfolded, had mastered 17 different alien languages, and had written her senior thesis on unconventional warfare tactics that her professors had called innovative to the point of dangerous. "Lieutenant Chen." The voice belonged to Admiral Varix, the Krillian who served as the Academy's commandant. He was 8 feet tall, covered in chitinous armor plating that had been scarred by countless battles, and possessed 4 arms that ended in claws capable of rending steel. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of military command. Sarah came to attention immediately. "Sir, walk with me." It wasn't a request. They moved through the corridors of the academy, past displays of famous battles and portraits of legendary commanders from dozens of species. Admiral Varix remained silent until they reached his office, a Spartan room dominated by tactical displays and weapons from across the galaxy. "You are wondering about your assignment," he said, settling his massive frame behind a desk that groaned under his weight. "Sir, I accept whatever assignment serves the Coalition best," Sarah replied carefully. A sound emerged from the Admiral's throat that might have been laughter if it hadn't sounded like grinding metal. "Diplomatic answer. But, you have questions. Ask them." Sarah hesitated, then decided directness was the only approach that might get her answers. My scores suggest I should have received a better posting, sir. I'm wondering if there were other factors in the decision. Other factors. Verix's four eyes studied her with the unblinking intensity of a predator. Yes, there were other factors. Tell me, Lieutenant, what do you know about humanity's reputation in the Coalition? The question caught her off guard. Sir? Your species has been part of the Coalition for 12 years. In that time, what reputation have humans developed among the other member species? Sarah thought carefully before answering. We're considered brave but inexperienced, sir. Innovative but unpredictable. Some species view us as useful but dangerous allies. Dangerous. Verix repeated the word slowly. Yes, that is accurate. Do you know why the Krillians initially opposed humanity's admission to the Coalition? Because our military traditions were too young? No. The Admiral's claws tapped against his desk. Because every tactical simulation we ran suggested that humans would either revolutionize modern warfare or destroy everything we had built trying. Possibly both. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't the conversation she had expected. The Taurasian Empire fell to human tactics during the border wars, Verix continued. 3,000 years of military dominance ended when human commanders started using strategies that our war colleges had never conceived of. Strategies that violated every accepted principle of galactic warfare. I studied those battles, sir. The human commanders were just adapting to desperate circumstances. Adapting. Another of those grinding laughs. Such a simple word for what actually happened. When faced with certain defeat, humans began fighting in ways that no other species had ever considered. You turned civilian transports into kinetic weapons. You used stellar phenomena as tactical assets. You convinced enemy forces to defect by offering them something our databases said their species could never value more than military honor. The Admiral leaned forward, and Sarah caught sight of a particular scar across his throat. She recognized it from her military history classes. That was the mark of a Taurasian pain blade, earned during the siege of Kronos Station. You were there, she realized. I commanded the Coalition relief force that arrived 3 days too late to prevent the human victory, Verix said quietly. I had brought 5 fleets and the most experienced tactical minds in the galaxy. We arrived to find that 50 human ships had somehow convinced an entire Taurasian sector fleet to surrender without firing a shot. Sarah's mouth went dry. She had read about the Kronos incident, but the details had always been classified above her clearance level. How? The human commander broadcast something to the Taurasian fleet. We still don't know exactly what was said. Whatever it was, it caused 3 Taurasian admirals to execute their own superiors and order their forces to stand down. The Tauraxians had never surrendered to anyone in their entire recorded history. Verix stood and moved to a wall display showing the current galactic map. The Coalition's territory was marked in blue, stretching across thousands of systems. But, at the edges, red markers indicated the growing threat that everyone tried not to think about too directly. The Devourers are coming, Lieutenant Chen. Our long-range scouts confirm it. The same force that consumed the Andromeda Collective and turned 3 entire spiral arms into lifeless void is moving toward our galaxy. Our most optimistic projections give us 18 months before they arrive. The Devourers. Sarah had heard whispers, but the threat had seemed too distant, too theoretical. The idea that something could consume entire civilizations was beyond most people's ability to process. Every species in the Coalition is preparing for this war in the same way, Verix continued. They are building bigger fleets, developing more powerful weapons, training more soldiers in conventional tactics. They are preparing to fight the Devourers the way we have fought every war for the past 10,000 years. He turned to face her directly. The Andromeda Collective tried the same approach. They had fleets that dwarfed our entire coalition. They had weapons that could destabilize stars. They had military traditions older than most species in our galaxy. All of it was useless. Sarah was beginning to understand where this conversation was heading, and it terrified her.
You think humans might fight differently?
I think humans might be our only hope of fighting differently enough to matter, Varric said bluntly.
But, here is the problem, Lieutenant.
Humanity's most effective commanders are also the ones most likely to make decisions that could destabilize the entire coalition if they go wrong.
We need human innovation, but we cannot risk human unpredictability in our main defense forces.
The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind. So you're sending human officers to frontier postings? Places where we can't do much damage if we go rogue. Places where you can develop your natural tactical instincts without oversight, Varric corrected. Places where, if the theories about human warfare are correct, you might discover something that could save us all. He moved to his desk and activated a secure display. Sarah found herself looking at detailed files on every human officer who had graduated from the academy.
Next to each name were assignment destinations.
All frontier postings.
All on the outer edge of coalition space.
Frontier Station 7 is not a punishment, Lieutenant Chen.
It is an opportunity.
The station sits at the intersection of 17 major hyperspace routes. It monitors deep space communications from 6 different sectors. If the Devourers come early, if they choose an unexpected route of attack, Frontier Station 7 will likely be among the first to know. Sarah felt her worldview reorganizing itself around this new information.
You're not just sending us away. You're positioning us.
I am gambling the future of the galaxy on the possibility that when humans are placed in impossible situations, they will do something impossible in response, Varric said simply.
History suggests this is a reasonable bet.
The Admiral moved to a weapons rack and selected a particle beam rifle of Krillian manufacture.
He handed it to Sarah, along with an equipment kit she didn't recognize.
Frontier Station 7 has a crew of 37 beings from 14 different species. The commanding officer is Colonel Thane, a Vorthack who has served in that position for 6 years without incident. The previous human liaison officer requested transfer to Core Defense after 8 months, citing insufficient challenge and career advancement opportunities.
Sarah hefted the rifle, noting modifications that weren't standard issue. What makes you think I'll be different?
Because your psychological profile suggests that you see patterns others miss, and you have a dangerous tendency to act on incomplete information when you believe lives are at stake, Varric said. Also, because your tactical theory thesis proposed using gravitational anomalies as weapons, which every military scholar in the coalition agreed was either brilliant or completely insane.
The conclusion was that it was completely insane, sir.
The conclusion was that it was both. Varric's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned to recognize as approval.
Which is exactly the kind of thinking we may need.
The Admiral handed her a sealed data packet. Your official orders and security clearances.
Your transport leaves in 6 hours. There is one more thing, Lieutenant.
He moved to a secure cabinet and withdrew a device Sarah didn't recognize. It looked like a standard communication array, but with modifications that seemed to incorporate technology from multiple species.
This is a quantum entanglement communicator.
It will allow you to send messages directly to my personal terminal without going through normal coalition channels. Use it if you discover something that requires immediate attention from the highest levels of command.
Sarah accepted the device, feeling its weight both physical and metaphorical. Sir, can I ask why you're telling me all this? If this is some kind of secret deployment strategy, why brief me on it?
Varric was quiet for a long moment, his 4 eyes focused on something beyond the room's walls. Because if our theories about the Devourers are correct, conventional military protocol will not be sufficient.
We need officers who can think beyond established parameters.
But we also need officers who understand the stakes well enough to make difficult decisions when the time comes. He stood and moved toward the door, indicating the conversation was ending.
Frontier Station May 7th seem like exile, Lieutenant Chen. But, if I am right about what is coming, it may also be the most important posting in the galaxy.
I am trusting you with more than just a routine assignment.
I am trusting you with the future.
As Sarah left the Admiral's office, her mind raced with the implications of everything she had learned. The other human graduates were being scattered across the outer rim, positioned like pieces on a game board whose rules she was only beginning to understand. The transport to Frontier Station 7 was a converted cargo hauler with minimal crew quarters and even less comfort. Sarah spent the 3-day journey reviewing everything she could access about her new posting and the sector it monitored. What she found was exactly what she had expected: nothing. Frontier Station 7 was described in official reports as a routine monitoring post with no significant tactical value. But, as the transport dropped out of hyperspace and approached the station, Sarah began to see things that the reports hadn't mentioned. The station's position wasn't random. It sat precisely at the gravitational balance point of a binary star system, using the natural forces to maintain position with minimal energy expenditure. More importantly, its sensor array was positioned to monitor not just the hyperspace routes that officially passed through the sector, but also several routes that didn't appear on any navigation charts she had access to. Frontier Station 7 looked like a routine monitoring post. But someone had positioned it to watch for things that weren't supposed to exist. As the transport docked and Sarah prepared to report for her first assignment as a coalition officer, she found herself wondering if Admiral Varix had told her everything he knew about why she was really here. Something in her gut suggested that the answer was no, and that she was about to discover exactly what the galaxy looked like when viewed from the places where officially nothing ever happened. The airlock hissed open with a sound that seemed to echo through Sarah's bones, and she stepped into Frontier Station 7 for the first time. The main corridor was wider than she had expected from the external schematics, with walls that curved slightly to accommodate the different heights and movement patterns of various species. Soft lighting strips provided illumination that could be adjusted across the spectrum to suit different visual requirements. What struck her immediately was how quiet it was. Not the tense quiet of a military installation on high alert, but the settled quiet of a place where nothing much ever happened and everyone was comfortable with that fact. Her first stop was the station commander's office, located at the hub of the station's wheel-shaped structure. Colonel Thane was waiting for her, and Sarah's first impression was of someone who had found his perfect niche and had no intention of leaving it. The Vorthok were a reptilian species known for their methodical approach to everything and their ability to remain completely still for hours at a time when thinking through complex problems. Colonel Thane embodied both traits. He was approximately 7 feet tall when fully upright, covered in scales that shifted from dark green to brown depending on the angle of the light, and possessed the kind of presence that suggested he had never met a regulation he couldn't follow precisely. "Lieutenant Chen," he said, his voice carrying the slight sibilant quality common to his species. "Welcome to Frontier Station 7. I trust your journey was uneventful." "Yes, sir. Thank you for having me." Colonel Thane gestured for her to take a seat across from his desk, which was organized with the kind of precision that suggested every item had a designated place and purpose. Multiple data displays showed various monitoring feeds from around the sector, all of them displaying the steady readings that indicated nothing of interest was happening anywhere. "Your predecessor left detailed notes about the station's routines and protocols," the colonel continued. "Lieutenant Morrison found our work here somewhat understimulating. I hope you will find it more to your liking." Sarah glanced at the monitoring displays, noting the sophistication of the sensor arrays. For a station that was supposed to be monitoring nothing, the equipment was remarkably advanced. "What exactly do we monitor here, sir?" "Hyperspace traffic through the sector, deep space communications, stellar phenomena, and general coalition security interests," Thane replied with the kind of tone that suggested he had given this answer many times before. "We maintain detailed logs of all activity and file reports with Sector Command twice weekly." He activated a display showing the sector map. Sarah could see the 17 hyperspace routes Admiral Varix had mentioned, along with automated tracking data for ships that had passed through over the past month. The traffic was minimal, mostly automated cargo haulers and the occasional civilian transport. "The work is straightforward but important," Colonel Thane continued. "We are often the first to detect navigational hazards, communication disruptions, or unusual phenomena that might affect shipping through this region. While it may seem routine, our vigilance ensures the safety of thousands of civilians who travel these routes." Sarah nodded, but something about the explanation felt incomplete. She had spent enough time studying star charts to know that the hyperspace routes through this sector weren't major shipping lanes. They were backup routes that most cargo companies avoided because they added days to travel time. "Sir, could I get a tour of the station?" I'd like to understand our capabilities before I begin my duties.
Of course. Colonel Thane stood with the fluid motion characteristic of his species. I believe you'll find our facilities quite comprehensive. The tour revealed that Frontier Station 7 was far more sophisticated than its designation as a monitoring post suggested. The sensor array was military-grade, capable of detecting energy signatures across multiple dimensions and tracking objects at ranges that exceeded standard navigation requirements. The communications suite could intercept and decode transmissions from dozens of different species and technological bases. Most interesting to Sarah was the Tactical Analysis Center, which seemed designed to process and correlate large amounts of data from multiple sources. This is quite sophisticated for a monitoring station, she observed as they passed through the analysis center. The outer rim requires more comprehensive monitoring than core systems, Colonel Thane replied. We must be prepared for a wide range of contingencies. They encountered other crew members throughout the tour. Chief Engineer Korvac, a stocky dweller in whose people were known for their technical expertise and their ability to keep ancient equipment running through sheer stubbornness. Dr. Yasara, a Selkian medic whose species' natural empathic abilities made them excellent at treating psychological as well as physical trauma. Communications specialist Zephyr, one of the energy-based Luxari whose natural affinity for electromagnetic phenomena made them invaluable for monitoring deep space transmissions. What Sarah noticed was how experienced the crew was. These weren't junior officers marking time at an unimportant posting. These were seasoned professionals with decades of service records, all of whom seemed content to be serving at what should have been a career backwater. The tour concluded in the station's observation deck, a transparent dome that provided a spectacular view of the binary star system the station orbited. The larger star was a stable yellow dwarf similar to Earth's sun, while its companion was a white dwarf that created interesting gravitational dynamics in the local space. Beautiful, Sarah said, genuinely impressed by the view. Indeed. The gravitational interaction between the two stars creates unique conditions that allow us to maintain position with minimal energy expenditure, Colonel Thane explained. It also provides natural masking for our sensory emissions, allowing us to monitor the surrounding region without advertising our presence. Sarah turned to study the colonel's profile as he gazed out at the stars. Sir, can I ask you a direct question? Certainly. What are we really doing here? Colonel Thane was quiet for several moments, his reptilian features unreadable. When he spoke, his voice carried a different tone than it had during the official tour. Lieutenant Chen, in your time at the academy, did you study the history of the Watchers? Sarah searched her memory. The Watchers were mentioned briefly in some of the historical texts, described as an informal network of observers positioned throughout Coalition space during the early expansion period. Most sources described them as an outdated intelligence gathering system that had been superseded by modern communication networks. I read some references, but the details were classified above my clearance level. The Watchers never went away, Lieutenant. They simply became more subtle. Colonel Thane turned to face her directly. Frontier Station 7 is not a routine monitoring post. We are a listening station, positioned to detect the first signs of threats that might approach the Coalition from beyond our established borders. Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in her mind. Threats like the Devourers. Colonel Thane's scales shifted color slightly, a sign of surprise among his species. You know about the Devourers. Admiral Varix briefed me before my assignment. He suggested that frontier postings might be more important than they appear. Admiral Varix is one of the few senior officers who understands what we may be facing, the colonel said quietly. The official position is that the Devourer threat is distant and theoretical. The unofficial reality is that we have lost contact with 3 deep space exploration fleets over the past year, and long-range sensors have detected energy signatures moving through intergalactic space that match theoretical profiles for Devourer technology. Sarah moved to one of the observation windows, looking out at the stars with new understanding. So we're an early warning system. We are the early warning system for this sector of space. If the Devourers approach through any of the possible routes our analysts have identified, we will likely be among the first to detect them. And then, what? We send a warning to Sector Command and evacuate? Colonel Thane joined her at the window. That would be the standard protocol. However, there is another possibility that Senior Command has asked us to consider. Sarah waited for him to continue. If our theoretical models are correct, the Devourers move through space by following gravitational currents and energy gradients. They are attracted to high-energy systems and large concentrations of matter. This binary star system, with its unique gravitational dynamics, might serve as a natural choke point that could funnel approaching Devourer forces through a predictable route. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. You're talking about using the station as bait.
I am talking about using the station's position to gather intelligence that could save billions of lives, Colonel Thane corrected. If we can understand how the Devourers navigate and what attracts them, we might be able to develop countermeasures or at least predict their movements with enough accuracy to evacuate threatened systems. Sarah stared out at the beautiful, deadly dance of the binary stars.
How long have you known about this?
I have commanded this station for 6 years. I learned the true nature of our mission 18 months ago, when deep space reconnaissance confirmed that the Devourer threat was real and imminent.
And you stayed.
The crew was given the option to request transfers.
None did.
Colonel Thane's voice carried a quiet pride.
We all understood what was at stake.
Sarah turned to face the colonel directly.
What about the previous human liaison officer? Did Lieutenant Morrison know? Lieutenant Morrison was not briefed on the classified aspects of our mission. His psychological profile suggested he would not respond well to that level of responsibility. But my profile suggests I would.
Your profile suggests you would do something about it, Colonel Thane said with what might have been approval.
Which is exactly what we need.
Over the following days, Sarah immersed herself in understanding the station's true capabilities and mission. She learned that the sensor array wasn't just monitoring known hyperspace routes, but also watching for the kind of large-scale gravitational disturbances that would indicate something massive moving through normal space. The communications equipment was designed to detect the energy signatures that Devourer technology was theorized to produce. The Tactical Analysis Center was running constant simulations based on the limited data available from the Andromeda Collective's final transmissions. What impressed her most was the crew's dedication to their impossible mission. They were tracking threats that might not arrive for months or years, using theoretical models based on incomplete data, preparing for an enemy that had never been directly observed by anyone still alive. Yet they performed their duties with the same professionalism and attention to detail that Sarah would have expected from a core defense installation.
Chief Engineer Korvac became her first real ally on the station.
The Dwellerin had a practical approach to impossible problems that Sarah found refreshing after years of theoretical study at the academy. The problem with fighting an unknown enemy, he explained as they worked together to calibrate the long-range sensors, is that you cannot plan for specific threats. You can only prepare to adapt quickly to whatever actually happens.
That sounds suspiciously like human military doctrine, Sarah observed. Korvac's beard bristled with amusement. Perhaps human military doctrine is not as unique as humans believe.
Any species that has survived long enough to reach the stars has learned to improvise when necessary.
But some species are better at it than others. Some species are more desperate than others, Korvac corrected. Desperation is a powerful teacher.
Sarah found herself thinking about that conversation often as she settled into her duties. The daily routines of monitoring and analysis were straightforward, but underneath the routine she could feel the weight of what they were really doing. They were the galaxy's early warning system for a threat that could end civilization itself. 3 weeks into her assignment, that theoretical threat suddenly became very real. Sarah was running the night shift in the communications center when the deep space array detected something that shouldn't have been possible. At first, she thought it was a sensor malfunction. The reading showed a massive gravitational disturbance moving through the void between galaxies, too large to be a natural phenomenon and too fast to be explained by conventional physics. She ran the detection protocols twice more before accepting what the sensors were telling her. Something enormous was moving through intergalactic space, following a trajectory that would bring it to the edge of Coalition territory in approximately 14 months.
Sarah activated the emergency protocols and contacted Colonel Thane immediately.
Within minutes, the senior staff had assembled in the Tactical Analysis Center, staring at displays that showed the impossible made real. Confirmed contact, Dr. Yasara reported from the sensor station. Mass estimate puts the object at roughly the size of a small moon, moving at approximately 12% of light speed through normal space. That's consistent with theoretical models for devourer movement, communications specialist Zephyr added, their energy field flickering with agitation. The gravitational signature matches the profiles developed from Andromeda collective data. Colonel Thane studied the displays with the methodical calm that characterized his species, but Sarah could see tension in the way his scales had shifted toward darker hues. "How confident are we in this detection?" he asked. 97% confidence, Sarah reported. "I've run full diagnostic checks on the array. This is real." The colonel activated the secure communications system. "I need to report this to Sector Command immediately. Continue monitoring and gather as much data as possible. If this is indeed a Devourer scout, we need to understand its capabilities and intentions." As the senior staff dispersed to their duties, Sarah remained in the analysis center, staring at the readings that changed everything. 4 months, the Devourer threat had been theoretical, a distant possibility that might never materialize. Now it was a mathematical certainty bearing down on them with inexorable purpose. What terrified her most was the realization that Admiral Varix had been right. When the impossible became real, conventional responses would not be sufficient. They would need to do something that no one had ever tried before. And, somehow, Sarah suspected that responsibility was going to fall to her. The response from Sector Command came faster than anyone had expected, and it wasn't what any of them had hoped to hear. Sarah stood in the communications center, reading the priority message that had arrived just 6 hours after Colonel Thane's initial report. The orders were clear, direct, and completely inadequate for the situation they were facing. "Maintain observation and continue regular reporting schedule," she read aloud to the assembled senior staff. "Do not attempt direct contact or active scanning that might reveal station position. Prepare for possible evacuation if threat vector changes." Chief Engineer Korvac made a sound that was probably profanity in his native language. "They want us to watch and do nothing while a moon-sized devourer approaches Coalition space." "The strategic logic is sound," Colonel Thane said, though his tone suggested he didn't entirely agree with it. "If we reveal our position through active scanning, we lose our intelligence gathering capability. If we attempt contact and provoke a hostile response, we could accelerate whatever timeline the devourers are operating on." Dr. Yasara's empathic abilities made her particularly sensitive to the emotional currents running through the group. "There's something else. Something Sector Command isn't telling us." Sarah had been thinking the same thing. The response was too quick, too prepared. This wasn't the first report of Devourer activity that Sector Command had received. "Zephyr," she said, turning to the communications specialist, "can you access the secure communication logs? I want to know what other reports have been filed in the past month." The Luxury's energy field flickered as they interfaced with the station's communication systems. What they found confirmed Sarah's suspicions and made the situation significantly worse. 17 reports of possible Devourer activity across the Outer Rim, Zephyr reported. 3 confirmed mass contacts similar to ours. 2 stations have gone silent after filing their initial reports. The implications were staggering. The Devourers weren't approaching as a single force. They were already here, moving through Coalition space in multiple groups, and the official response was to watch quietly and hope they passed by without noticing anything important. "This is insane," Sarah said, forgetting military protocol in her shock. "If there are multiple Devourer forces already in our space, we need to be coordinating defensive responses, evacuating civilian populations, mobilizing the fleet." "The fleet is mobilizing," Colonel Thane replied quietly. "But not in the way you would expect." He activated a secure display that showed troop movements across Coalition space. Sarah studied the data with growing disbelief. "They're consolidating around core systems," she realized. "They're abandoning the Outer Rim entirely. The strategic assessment is that core worlds can be defended with concentrated forces," the colonel explained. "Outer Rim systems are considered acceptable losses if they provide intelligence about Devourer capabilities and intentions." Sarah stared at the display, her mind racing through the implications. How many people live in the systems they're abandoning? Dr. Yasara consulted her medical database.
approximately 47 million sentient beings across 1,200 systems. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow.
47 million people written off as acceptable losses so that the core worlds could gather intelligence and prepare defenses. It was strategic thinking on a galactic scale, and it was also the most coldly calculating decision she had ever encountered. "There has to be another way," she said.
"Such as?" Colonel Thane asked, and Sarah could hear genuine interest in his voice rather than dismissal.
Sarah moved to the tactical display, studying the sensor data they had gathered on the Devourer contact. The object was massive, moving at incredible speed, and following a trajectory that would take it through 17 different star systems before reaching the core defense perimeter. "We're assuming the Devourers are inevitably hostile," she said, thinking out loud. "But what if they're not? What if they're just hungry?" Chief Engineer Korvac leaned forward with interest. "Explain." "The Andromeda collective data suggests the Devourers consume energy and matter on a massive scale. But consumption doesn't necessarily mean hostility. What if they're just trying to survive, and they don't understand that the systems they're consuming are inhabited?" "You're suggesting communication might be possible," Dr. Yasara said slowly. "I'm suggesting that if we're going to die anyway, we might as well try something that hasn't been attempted before." Sarah turned to face the group. "The official strategy is to let them consume 47 million people while we gather intelligence. I think we can do better than that." Communications specialist Zephyr's energy field pulsed with uncertainty. "Communication with the Devourers would require understanding their technology, their language, their motivations. We have theoretical models at best." "We have the most sophisticated communications array in this sector," Sarah countered. "We have crew members from 14 different species with expertise in xenobiology, linguistics, and first contact protocols. And we have something that none of the previous responders have had." "Which is?" Colonel Thane asked. "Time to prepare and position to observe. The Devourer contact is still 4 days away from the first inhabited system in its path. That gives us time to study its communication patterns, energy signatures, and behavior. If we can understand how it operates, we might be able to establish some form of contact." The colonel was quiet for several moments, his scales shifting through different color patterns as he processed the proposal. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of command decision. "What you are suggesting would violate direct orders from Sector Command. It would require using active scanning that could reveal our position. It would involve attempting first contact with a species that has already demonstrated the ability to destroy entire civilizations." "Yes, sir. It could also provide information that saves billions of lives instead of merely gathering intelligence about how those lives are lost." Sarah held her breath, waiting for his decision. "Dr. Yasara, what is your assessment of the psychological readiness of the crew for this type of mission?" The Selkian medic's empathic senses swept over the group before she responded. "High stress levels, but also high determination. The crew believes strongly that their current orders are insufficient for the threat we're facing. They would support an alternative approach." "Chief Korvac, can our systems handle the kind of intensive scanning and communication efforts Lieutenant Chen is proposing?" "The equipment is designed for this type of operation," the engineer replied. "We would need to modify some of the communication arrays and boost power to the sensor systems, but it's within our capabilities." "Zephyr, can you develop communication protocols for a species we know nothing about?" "Unknown. But the attempt would provide valuable data regardless of success." Colonel Thane stood and moved to the observation windows, looking out at the binary stars that had hidden their station so effectively. Sarah could see him weighing the decision that would define not just their own fates, but potentially the fate of everyone in the Outer Rim systems. "Lieutenant Chen," he said finally, "you have 48 hours to develop a comprehensive plan for attempting communication with the Devourer contact. If your plan is feasible and offers a reasonable chance of success without compromising the station's security, we will attempt it." "And if Sector Command disapproves?" The colonel's scale shifted to a pattern Sarah had never seen before, one that suggested grim determination. "Then, we will remind them that frontier stations are expected to use initiative when facing unexpected situations. The next 48 hours were the most intensive of Sarah's military career. Working with the senior staff, she developed a communication strategy that drew on everything they knew about xenobiology, physics, and first contact protocols. The plan was complex but elegant. Instead of attempting direct communication, they would observe the devourer's interaction with natural phenomena to understand how it processed and responded to different types of energy. They would then use the binary star system's unique gravitational dynamics to create energy patterns that might be recognized as artificial rather than natural. If the devourer showed interest in artificial energy patterns, they would gradually increase the complexity of the signals until they established a basic mathematical communication framework. From there, they could attempt to convey concepts like inhabited systems, sentient life, and the possibility of coexistence. The plan required precise timing, sophisticated coordination of multiple systems, and a level of improvisation that made everyone nervous. It also required accepting that failure would likely result in the destruction of Frontier Station 7 and everyone aboard. As the Devourer contact approached the first inhabited system in its path, Sarah found herself in the communications center, surrounded by displays showing energy readings that defied conventional physics. The object was definitely artificial, definitely massive, and definitely unlike anything in Coalition databases.
Contact will reach the Zirian system in 6 hours, Chief Korvac reported. 3 million inhabitants across 2 planets. All stations report ready, Dr. Yasara added.
Sarah looked at Colonel Thane, who had taken his position at the command station. "Sir, we're ready to begin the communication attempt."
The colonel activated the station's recording systems, ensuring that whatever happened would be preserved for analysis. "Begin Phase 1, he ordered.
Sarah initialized the modified sensor array, sending focused beams of energy toward the Devourer contact. The beams were designed to appear natural at first, mimicking the kind of radiation that might come from stellar phenomena, but with subtle mathematical patterns embedded in the energy signatures. The response was immediate and terrifying. The Devourer contact stopped. For the first time since they had detected it, the massive object ceased its relentless movement toward Coalition space. It hung in the void between stars, and Sarah could feel its attention turning toward their position like the gaze of something vast and alien and utterly beyond human comprehension.
"It knows we're here," Zephyr reported, their energy field crackling with static.
"It's scanning our position with energy patterns I don't recognize."
"Gravitational readings are fluctuating," Chief Korvac added. "Whatever it's doing is affecting local spacetime." Sarah watched the displays showing the Devourer's energy output, trying to understand what they were seeing. The patterns were complex, layered, and definitely artificial. More importantly, they seemed to be responding to the mathematical sequences the station had transmitted. "I think it's trying to communicate," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Yasara moved to the xenobiology station, her empathic abilities focused on trying to interpret the emotional or psychological content of the alien signals. "There's intelligence here. Vast intelligence. But also, hunger. Desperate hunger." Sarah made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. "Send the next sequence," she ordered. "Mathematical progression, but include stellar cartography data. Show it the inhabited systems." The response came back immediately, and it changed everything. The Devourer contact transmitted a burst of information so complex and overwhelming that it overloaded their communication systems. But, in the brief moment before the systems shut down to prevent damage, Sarah glimpsed something that made her blood freeze. The transmission contained detailed maps of the local galactic region, showing not just the inhabited systems they had identified, but hundreds more that Coalition databases didn't know existed. It showed energy patterns and resource distributions across thousands of light-years. And, most terrifyingly, it showed other Devourer contacts throughout the galaxy, all following carefully planned routes toward the highest concentrations of energy and matter. The Devourers weren't just consuming randomly. They were coordinating. They were intelligent. And they were planning something that involved the systematic harvesting of every energy source in the galaxy. As the communication system slowly came back online, Sarah realized that they had just made first contact with a species that could end all life in the known universe. And, somehow, they had gotten its attention. The silence in the communications center was broken only by the steady hum of equipment cycling back online. Sarah stared at the displays, her mind struggling to process what they had just experienced. The Devourer hadn't just responded to their communication attempt. It had downloaded what appeared to be a complete strategic overview of its species' activities across the galaxy. "Systems are stabilizing," Chief Engineer Korvac reported, his voice unusually quiet. "The data burst overloaded our receivers, but I'm reading no permanent damage." Communications specialist Zephyr's energy field flickered with patterns Sarah had never seen before. "I was interfacing with the communication array when the transmission came through. There was something else in the data stream. Something that felt like recognition." Dr. Yasara looked up from her analysis station, her empathic abilities clearly strained by whatever she had sensed during the contact. The intelligence behind the transmission was ancient. Older than our civilization, older than most of the species in the coalition. But, also, familiar somehow. Colonel Thane moved to the tactical display, studying the information they had managed to capture before the systems overloaded. "Lieutenant Chen, explain to me what you think just happened." Sarah took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "Sir, I believe we just made contact with an advanced scout for a Devourer fleet. But I don't think they're what we thought they were." "Elaborate." "The data transmission was too sophisticated, too complete. If the Devourers were simple consumers, they wouldn't need detailed galactic maps showing resource distributions and population centers. They would just consume everything in their path." Sarah moved to the communications console, pulling up the fragments of data they had managed to record. This suggests strategic planning, long-term thinking, and an understanding of galactic civilization that goes beyond simple predation. Chief Korvac nodded slowly. "The energy patterns in the transmission were artificial, but they used technologies I recognize. Gravitational manipulation, quantum entanglement communication, exotic matter processing. These are not unknown sciences, just applications far beyond our current capabilities." "You're suggesting the Devourers are using advanced versions of technologies we already understand," Colonel Thane said. "I'm suggesting they might not be alien at all," Sarah replied, and the words hung in the air like a challenge to everything they thought they knew. Dr. Yasara's medical scanner beeped softly as she completed her analysis of the crew's physiological responses during the contact. "Sarah's right about the familiarity. My empathic readings during the contact showed patterns consistent with communication between related species, not first contact with something completely alien." The implications were staggering, and Sarah could see each member of the crew working through them independently. If the Devourers weren't aliens, if they were somehow related to known galactic civilization, then the destruction of the Andromeda Collective might not have been random predation. "We need to re-establish contact," Sarah said. "But, this time, we need to approach it differently. Instead of trying to warn them away from inhabited systems, we need to try to understand what they're actually trying to accomplish." Colonel Thane's scales shifted through several color patterns before settling on one that indicated deep concern. "Lieutenant, what you're proposing could be considered treason if interpreted incorrectly. You're talking about potentially cooperating with an enemy that has already demonstrated the capability to destroy entire galactic civilizations." "Sir, I'm talking about trying to understand a situation before we assume it can only be resolved through warfare." Sarah called up the star chart showing the Devourers' projected routes through Coalition space. "If we're right about their level of technological advancement, conventional military resistance would be suicide. Our only hope is to find a solution that doesn't require defeating them in battle." Communications specialist Zephyr moved to the long-range sensor station, their energy form crackling with nervous energy. "I'm detecting movement from the contact. It's changed course." Everyone turned to the tactical display, which showed the Devourer contact altering its trajectory. Instead of continuing toward the inhabited systems in its original path, it was now moving toward Frontier Station 7. "Time to contact?" Colonel Thane asked. "Approximately 18 hours at current velocity," Chief Korvac replied. Sarah felt her stomach clench. "It's coming to talk. Or to eliminate the source of the transmission," Dr. Yasara added quietly. Colonel Thane activated the secure communication system. "I'm reporting this development to Sector Command immediately."
Regardless of our theories about devourer intentions, we have an immediate tactical situation that requires command attention. As the colonel made his report, Sarah found herself studying the data fragments from the earlier transmission. There was something in the energy patterns that nagged at her, a sense that she should recognize something but couldn't quite identify what it was. "Zephyr," she said, "can you isolate the mathematical sequences from the transmission? I want to run them through our xenolinguistics database." The Luxari worked with the damaged communication systems, extracting what data they could. When the results appeared on Sarah's screen, she felt the universe shift around her. The mathematical sequences weren't alien. They were human. Not current human mathematics, but recognizable as an advanced development of human mathematical principles. The progression of formulae showed evolution from concepts that Sarah recognized from her academy training, developed far beyond what current human science could achieve, but undeniably based on human mathematical thinking. "This is impossible," she whispered, then called the others to her station. "Look at this. The mathematical foundation of their communication protocols. It's based on human mathematics." Chief Korvac examined the data with the careful attention he applied to any technical problem. "The progression is logical. If human mathematics continued to develop for several thousand years, incorporating technologies for manipulating gravity and quantum fields, this is consistent with what we might expect." "You're suggesting the Devourers are descendants of humanity?" Colonel Thane asked. "I'm suggesting they're descendants of something that started with humanity," Sarah corrected. "But the implications are the same. If they're not alien invaders, if they're somehow related to human civilization, then there might be possibilities for negotiation that we haven't considered." Dr. Yasara moved to her medical analysis station, running comparative studies on the energy patterns they had recorded. "There's something else. The empathic resonance patterns from the contact. They're consistent with human emotional structures, but amplified and modified in ways I don't understand." "Modified how?" "Imagine human emotions experienced by something that thinks in terms of geological timescales and interstellar distances. The patterns are recognizable, but the context is completely beyond normal human experience." Colonel Thane was quiet for several minutes, processing the information and its implications. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a command decision that could affect the fate of billions. "Lieutenant Chen, you have until the contact arrives to develop a comprehensive communication strategy based on these new assumptions. If you're correct about their relationship to humanity, we may have an opportunity that no one else in the galaxy possesses. And if I'm wrong? Then, we'll likely discover that very shortly." The next 18 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. Working with the entire senior staff, she developed a communication approach that assumed the Devourers were technologically advanced descendants of human civilization who had been forced to adopt survival strategies that appeared to threaten current galactic civilization. The key insight came from Dr. Yasara's analysis of the empathic patterns. If the Devourers experienced emotions on the same scale as their technology and time frames, then what appeared to be aggressive expansion might actually be desperate survival behavior driven by needs and pressures that operated on completely different scales than normal biological life. Sarah's strategy focused on establishing a framework for understanding rather than negotiation. Instead of trying to convince the Devourers to avoid inhabited systems, she would try to understand why they needed to consume the resources those systems represented, and whether there were alternative approaches that could meet those needs without destroying existing civilizations. As the contact approached Frontier Station 7, the crew prepared for what might be either the most important diplomatic contact in galactic history or their final moments of existence. "Contact will arrive in 30 minutes, Chief Korvac reported. Energy readings are off the charts. Whatever it is, it's larger and more powerful than our initial estimates suggested." Sarah took her position at the communication station, surrounded by displays showing mathematical models, xenobiological theories, and communication protocols that represented their best hope of understanding something that defied all previous categories. "All stations report ready," Colonel Thane announced. The wait was excruciating. Sarah found herself thinking about her conversation with Admiral Varix, about the human tendency to do impossible things when faced with impossible situations. She had a feeling they were about to test that theory under the most extreme conditions possible.
contact arriving, Zephyr announced. Sarah looked at the external sensors and felt her breath catch in her throat. The Devourer wasn't a ship in any sense she understood. It was a structure, vast and organic-looking, that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions her instruments couldn't properly measure. It was beautiful and terrifying, clearly artificial but following design principles that suggested a completely different understanding of the relationship between technology and life. "It's not stopping," Chief Korvac reported. "It's moving directly toward the station." "No hostile energy signatures," Dr. Yasara added. "But the scale of its power systems is beyond anything in our databases." Sarah made another decision that would define the rest of her life. "Open all communication channels," she ordered. "Transmit on all frequencies, all energy spectrums, all mathematical frameworks we've developed." She began the communication sequence they had prepared, but instead of the careful, tentative approach they had planned, she said everything at once. Human mathematics, human music, human literature, human history, and human hopes, all transmitted simultaneously in the hope that something in the vast data stream would resonate with whatever intelligence controlled the approaching structure. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Devourer structure enveloped Frontier Station 7 without harming it, creating a pocket of spacetime where normal physics seemed suspended. Sarah found herself looking through the station's walls as if they were transparent, seeing into a vast chamber filled with technologies beyond imagination and beings that were recognizably based on human forms but evolved far beyond current humanity. And then, impossibly, she heard a voice that spoke directly into her mind in perfect, unaccented English. "We have been searching for you for a very long time." Sarah found herself standing in what appeared to be the observation deck of Frontier Station 7, but the walls were transparent and the space beyond them defied every law of physics she understood. The binary star system was still visible, but it now shared the view with structures and phenomena that couldn't exist in normal spacetime. The voice that had spoken in her mind belonged to a figure approaching through the impossible architecture surrounding them. At first glance, it appeared human, but as it drew closer, Sarah could see the modifications that marked it as something that had once been human but had become something else entirely. The being was tall, perhaps 7 feet in height, with features that suggested both great age and timeless youth. Its eyes held depths that seemed to contain the memory of galaxies, and, when it moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around it. But, despite all the differences, Sarah could see the underlying human template that everything else had been built upon. "I am Keeper Aldrin Chen," the being said, and Sarah felt her knees nearly give out at the implications of that name. "I was born on Earth approximately 4,000 years ago, and I am your descendant many generations removed." Behind Keeper Chen, other figures approached, and Sarah could see her crewmates materializing in the same impossible space. Colonel Thane's scales were shifting rapidly through colors that indicated extreme confusion, while Chief Korvac was examining the surrounding technology with the fascination of an engineer encountering principles beyond his understanding. "This is impossible," Dr. Yasara said, her empathic abilities clearly overwhelmed by whatever she was sensing from their hosts. "Impossible is a word that has lost much of its meaning over the millennia," Keeper Chen replied with what might have been a smile. "Your species has always possessed a remarkable talent for making the impossible into the inevitable." Communications specialist Zephyr's energy form was crackling with patterns Sarah had never seen before. "The technology here. It's not just advanced human technology. It's human consciousness merged with fundamental forces of the universe." "An accurate observation," Keeper Chen confirmed. "What you call the Devourers are the descendants of humanity's first interstellar expedition. We left Earth 3,000 years ago when our scientists detected the approach of a cosmic event that would render the galaxy uninhabitable for baseline biological life." Sarah felt her worldview reorganizing itself around this revelation. "The Devourers aren't aliens. You're refugees. We are the survivors of a cosmic catastrophe that has not yet reached this region of space," Keeper Chen corrected. "The wave of dark energy that consumed the Andromeda Collective and is moving toward this galaxy represents the end of the current cosmic epoch. When it arrives, the fundamental forces that allow matter to exist in its current form will be altered. All biological life, all conventional technology, all planetary civilizations will cease to exist." Colonel Thane found his voice. "How long do we have?" approximately 18 months before the wave reaches the edge of coalition space.
Perhaps 6 months after that before it affects the core systems.
The numbers hit Sarah like a physical blow.
Everything they had thought they understood about the timeline was wrong.
The Devourers weren't an approaching threat. They were the only hope for survival that anyone in the galaxy possessed.
"The systems you've been consuming," she said, understanding dawning.
"You're not destroying them. You're trying to save them."
"We are harvesting the quantum information that defines matter and consciousness before the wave destroys it," Keeper Chen explained. "Every world we consume is preserved within our ships in a form that can survive the transition to the new cosmic epoch."
The Andromeda Collective was not destroyed.
It was saved, though in a form that baseline biological consciousness cannot directly perceive. Dr. Yasara moved closer to one of the other figures, her medical scanners active.
"The life signs I'm reading. They're not individual beings. They're collective consciousnesses, thousands of minds merged into single entities.
The process of survival requires abandoning individual biological existence," another of the beings explained. "Consciousness can be preserved, but not in the separated forms that characterize current galactic civilization."
Sarah felt the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with terrifying clarity.
"That's why you stopped when we made contact. You detected human mathematical thinking and realized that Earth's civilization had survived and developed. We have been searching for evidence of human survival since we began the evacuation process," Keeper Chen confirmed. "Finding you represents the possibility of something we had not dared hope for." "Which is?" "The possibility that humanity's unique approach to impossible problems might offer an alternative to the collective consciousness solution."
Chief Engineer Korvac looked up from his examination of the surrounding technology.
"You're talking about finding a way to survive the cosmic transition without giving up individual existence. The mathematical foundations of human consciousness contain patterns that suggest individual awareness might be preserved through the transition if properly prepared," Keeper Chen explained. "But the process would require modifications to human neurology and the development of technologies that we have not yet perfected."
Sarah's mind raced through the implications. "How many people can you save using your current methods?"
"All of them, in theory. But the preserved consciousness would exist as part of our collective, experiencing reality on scales and in ways that would be unrecognizable to current human awareness."
"And with the alternative approach?" "Unknown.
Potentially all current forms of consciousness could be preserved individually, but the risk of complete failure is significant.
If we are wrong about human neurological plasticity, the attempt would result in the permanent destruction of everyone we try to save."
The weight of what they were discussing settled over Sarah like a physical force.
They weren't just talking about the fate of humanity.
They were talking about choosing between guaranteed survival in an unrecognizable form and possible survival as themselves.
"What do you need from us?" Colonel Thane asked.
"Access to current human populations for neurological analysis and willing volunteers for experimental procedures," Keeper Chen replied. "Also, access to human military and scientific personnel who can help develop the technologies necessary for individual consciousness preservation." Sarah realized that everything Admiral Varix had told her about human officers being positioned on the frontier made perfect sense now. The other human officers at frontier stations.
"You've been making contact with them too."
"We have. Some have agreed to join our research efforts. Others have chosen to maintain their current positions to help prepare for the evacuation process.
All have been sworn to secrecy until we determine the optimal approach for presenting these options to galactic civilization."
"Why the secrecy?" Communications specialist Zephyr answered that question. "Because if the general population learned that they had 18 months before a cosmic catastrophe ended all life as they know it, the resulting panic would destroy civilization more effectively than the Devourers ever could." Dr. Yasara was studying her medical readings with growing amazement. "The neurological modifications you've made to preserve human consciousness.
They're not random evolutionary changes.
You've been experimenting with consciousness preservation for thousands of years."
"We have been preparing for this moment since we first detected the approaching wave," Keeper Chen confirmed.
"Every world we have evacuated, every consciousness we have preserved, has taught us more about the nature of awareness and the possibilities for its survival.
Sarah found herself facing the most important decision in human history. What happens if we agree to help? What would cooperation look like? You would maintain your current positions while secretly coordinating with our research teams. We would provide you with technology and information that would allow Frontier Station 7 to serve as a testing ground for consciousness preservation techniques. If successful, the techniques would be rapidly disseminated to other human-operated stations and, eventually, to the general population.
And, if we refuse? We continue with our current evacuation methods and hope that the collective consciousness preservation of humanity will be sufficient to ensure the species' survival into the new cosmic epoch. Colonel Thane stepped forward, his scales settling into patterns that indicated command decision.
How long do we have to decide?
The cosmic wave will reach this region whether we intervene or not, Keeper Chen replied.
But our evacuation schedule depends on having complete information about current human neurological development. We need your decision within the next 72 hours.
As the impossible meeting continued, Sarah found herself thinking about Admiral Varix's words about humans doing impossible things when faced with impossible situations. The choice they were being asked to make was beyond anything in military doctrine or diplomatic protocol. They were being asked to help decide the future form of human consciousness. But, as she looked at her crewmates, at the beings who had once been human and were now something unimaginably more, she realized that the choice had already been made. They had spent their careers preparing for situations that required innovation, adaptation, and the courage to attempt solutions that had never been tried before.
"I'll do it," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was agreeing to.
"I'll help develop the consciousness preservation techniques." One by one, the other crew members voiced their agreement. Even Colonel Thane, despite the military regulations this decision would violate, agreed to participate in what might be the most important research project in galactic history.
"Then, we begin immediately," Keeper Chen said.
"Welcome to the real war for the survival of consciousness itself." Over the following weeks, Frontier Station 7 became something unprecedented in galactic history, a research facility where baseline humans and post-human entities worked together to develop technologies that could preserve individual consciousness through a cosmic catastrophe that would reshape the fundamental nature of reality. Sarah found herself at the center of experiments that pushed the boundaries of what it meant to be human. The consciousness preservation techniques required modifications to human neurology that would enhance mental processing capabilities while maintaining individual personality and memory structures. The volunteers among the crew served as test subjects for procedures that were equal parts medical treatment and technological augmentation. The work was dangerous, exhausting, and completely beyond anything she had trained for. But, as the weeks passed and the techniques proved successful, Sarah began to understand why Admiral Varix had positioned human officers throughout the frontier.
They weren't just early warning systems or disposable intelligence assets.
They were the testing ground for humanity's survival as a conscious species. 6 months later, when the cosmic wave finally reached the edge of Coalition space and the evacuation of 47 billion sentient beings began, the process included options that preserved individual consciousness alongside collective preservation. The techniques developed at Frontier Station 7 and other frontier posts allowed billions of beings to survive the cosmic transition while maintaining their individual awareness. Sarah Chen, the lieutenant who had been tagged as inexperienced by her academy instructors, became known throughout the galaxy as the architect of individual consciousness preservation. The frontier stations where she and her fellow human officers had been quietly stationed became the legendary outposts where impossible survival became possible. And, when the new cosmic epoch began and sentient beings found themselves existing in a universe with fundamentally different physical laws, they retained enough of their individual awareness to remember who they had been and choose who they would become.
In the end, the greatest human contribution to galactic civilization wasn't military strength or technological innovation.
It was the stubborn refusal to accept that impossible situations couldn't be solved by people willing to attempt impossible solutions. The galaxy never forgot the lesson, and Sarah Chen's name was spoken with reverence whenever sentient beings faced challenges that seemed beyond hope. She had been tagged inexperienced, but the universe had named her Mythical, and the legend that grew around her story inspired countless generations to attempt the impossible when the impossible was the only path to survival.